Chiamo Afurakanu Afuraitkaitnut Neye Ojirada Medinde Ojirafo Kwesi Ranen Bata Akan Akpamumana Maruka Etipi Mu Ojirafo Ojiramai Mu. Greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning African black people. Today is Ojira Day, Purification Day. My name is Ojirafo Kwesi Ranen Bata Akan. Ojirafo of the Akwamu Nation in North America. Within Ojiramai, the purified nation, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, African black people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast once again. We're going to put some links in the chat room right now, dealing with the information that we will be discussing. And for the individuals who are new to the broadcast, if you have a question or a comment and you're in the chat room, you must log into the chat room in order to interact in the chat room. You must log in with a username. If you don't have a username, you can sign up for one quickly in Blog Talk. If you have a question or a comment on the phone line, simply hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised, and then we can interact in the chat room. I'm sorry, on the phone line. So we have 3 broadcasts on a weekly basis, and then we added a 4th broadcast recently. So now we've gone from 3 to 4. On Monday nights, Joda, we have Akan Nanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion, where we deal specifically with the Akan expression of Nanasom Ancestral Religion. Number 1, because we are Akan. Number 2, because of the misinformation that has been propagated and continues to be propagated regarding Akan philosophy, Akan trustery, Akan cosmology, the nature of the Abosom, the deities, the nature of the Nananom Nsamanso, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, the nature of Nyamewa, the great mother, and Nyame, the great father, the supreme being, the nature of Nyokumpon and Nyokumpon, the creator and creatress, who are grandchildren of the supreme being, and many other issues. So we deal with Akanpo Nanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion on Joda on Monday night. On Ojirada, Purification Day, we deal with ancestral religion in general, no matter where we come from on the continent or anywhere in the world. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people, we align with the supreme being, the great mother and great father, through the agency of the deities and ancestral spirits. We talk about how ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives. We're going to get into that in our topic tonight. On Awukuda or Akuada, which is Wednesday night, we have Egua Marketplace, and we showcase the business, organization, or institution, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit business, organization, or institution that is serving the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African black community, and also maintaining our ancestral religious values in the process. We have showcased a number of businesses, organizations, and institutions. When you go to our home economic development model page, you will see the list of those businesses, organizations, and institutions, their websites, as well as the links to the interviews they did with us on the broadcast. And part of that process, and what you'll see on the OCOM Economic Development Model page, that is document OCOM Economic Development Model, is our approach to economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values. So you can download that document from the page. You can download the 4-part series we did on Blog Talk, where we examine the document and examine that approach to economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values. And then part of that process is this operation where we starve the beast and feed the pride. So we identify one Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit business, organization, or institution per week for 52 weeks, and we support that institution as a community. We starve the beast and feed the pride. So that means on a weekly basis, you make a determination about what funds you would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and then you starve the beast and feed the pride. You reallocate those funds away from that white business and direct them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. We target one per week that's for optimal capital infusion. If you reallocate funds away from white businesses to the black business of the week, reallocate $10 or $15 away from a white business that you would have wasted at Walmart or Starbucks or somewhere else, and redirect those funds to the business of the week, that's a redirection or reallocation of $10 or $15 to a black business from a white business. When 1,000 of our people engage that process, that's a reallocation of $10,000 to $15,000 in the course of 1 week from white businesses directly back into the hands of a black business who can expand their products and services to us, hire people within the community, and it's a win-win situation, of course. If we fail to do so, then by default, we leave that $10,000 or $15,000 in the hands of our absolute enemies, the whites and their offspring, in their businesses, serving their people, and by default, we are financing our own oppression. So we starve the beast and feed the pride. We've supported a number of businesses over the past 12-month period, and this list of businesses, organizations, and institutions is an ever-growing list. So that's on the OCOM Economic Development Model page, and we'll put the link in the chat room for that right now. And we're also going to put the link in the chat room right now for the ODWIRA Afashe, and that is in the chat room right now. So for those who are unaware, we are having our first annual ODWIRA Afashe, which means the purified nation. ODWIRA, the purified nation of Afuraitkaitnut people, African black people in the Western Hemisphere. ODWIRA, mine means nation. Mine also means land of the setting sun in the language of ancient Kemet. Jira means purification. Jira means the purified nation in the Western Hemisphere. It's a designation for Afuraitkaitnut people, African black people, as a collective in the Western Hemisphere. Those of us who are descended from our ancestors and ancestors who were forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Ketie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. Those of us who waged war against the whites and their offspring, held on to our ancestral religious tradition, were empowered and guided to wage war and massacre the whites and their offspring and free ourselves from enslavement, force the end of enslavement through waging war against the United States, and forcing emancipation and the acceptance of emancipation and the acceptance of abolition and the acceptance of repatriation programs and so forth. ODWIRA, the purified nation in the Western Hemisphere. Afuraitkaitnut people in the Western Hemisphere. We're having our ODWIRA Afashe, which is a conference and festival for ODWIRA, the purified nation of Afuraitkaitnut people in the Western Hemisphere. Our focus is Amaniye, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, African Black nationism, the purification of nationalism. So we will have a number of different presenters. You can see on the page the list of presenters, some video presentations, some live presentations. We also have our vendors throughout the course of the day from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. You can shop with the vendors as well. So you can go on the page, you can see all of that information. On the ODWIRA Afashe page is Afida Friday, Afidam, it's a sacred Friday, and Afidam Friday in our Khan calendar. Fida Friday, June 24th from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. Washington, D.C. It is a free event. It is open to Afuraitkaitnut people only. Registration is required, but registration is free. So you simply go to our page and you'll see the link for the registration, and you simply click on that link to indicate that you're going to come to the conference. One announcement we did to send out an email today. We had a deadline for the submission of ads. We're going to publish our ODWIRA Afashe journal, and we're going to give away that free book to everyone who comes to the conference, as well as we'll have the online version, which will be on our website permanently, and we will have a softcover version for those who would like to purchase that. We'll have articles on nationism, Maniye nationism, the purification of nationalism, and a number of different things, as well as the list of vendors and so forth. If you'd like to place your ad for your business, organization, institution, study group, or just an ad in support of the work we're doing, we do have a little bit more space. We are in the midst of formatting the book now. The book will be released next week, and we will print it as we do our other books and give it away for free to everyone who attends the conference. So we have a little bit more space. So if you still want to put an ad in for your business, your organization, your institution, your study group, or just a personal ad to show support and to communicate a message to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people, you can do so. Go to the ODWIRA Afashe page tonight, ASAP, because we need those JPEG files in as soon as possible. We are in the formatting phase right now, so we need to get that done as soon as possible so that we can move on to the printing phase so we can have enough time to have them printed out before next week. So if you would like to place an ad, you can do that, but you have to send those JPEG files in ASAP. A 1/4 page ad is $25, half page ad is $35, full page is $50, and it's a full 8.5 by 11 size, magazine size, full color publication. So we just wanted to send that information out. All right. And so that's all connected with as a matter of fact, the Egwa Marketplace show Wednesday night, that kind of activity, and the ODWIRA Afashe, the ODWIRA conference that we're having. That's actually the business of the week for this week, leading up until tomorrow, and then from tomorrow, Wednesday, Awukuda. The next Wednesday, we will have another business that is showcased for the next 7 days, and every Wednesday, Awukuda, we will move to another business. This is what we're dealing with. So when you go to your economic development model page, you'll see that information. The fourth broadcast that we have on a weekly basis, this is our new broadcast on Yada Abada Thursday night. It's Amain Tim, affairs of the Amain, affairs of the nation. So things that are taking place within Ujiraman, the purified nation within our community, as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people, as collective, how we need to address those things from an ancestral religious perspective so we can bring balance to our communities and protect ourselves, defend ourselves, develop ourselves, and so forth as we're moving towards Amaniye, nationism, the purification of nationalism. So that's on Yauda Thursday night. All right. So to get into this topic tonight, Hapi, the male divinity, the Ntoro, the male divinity of the river, the Nayar, or the so-called Nile River, twin divinity. There's Hapi Met and Hapi Reset. Hapi of the north, Hapi of the south. This male divinity is not a dissexual, not homosexual, not a transgender, not a sexual deviant, a pervert, as the whites and their offspring seek to portray him as. The whites and their offspring, when you look on their various websites, they're always trying and seeking to force their sexual deviance onto our culture and into our culture, into our religious practices, into our culture just in general. The whites and their offspring by nature are sexual deviants. They are perverts, dykes, faggots, lesbians. They're beasts by nature. Every one of them who exists, everyone who has ever existed, and every one of them who ever will exist until they become extinct, until we make them extinct. That means the white Europeans, white Americans, white Hindus, white Arabs, white Asians, white Hispanics, white Latinos, Latinas, white pseudo-Native Americans who are just Asians who migrated and invaded this hemisphere and came in contact with Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people who preceded them in this hemisphere and preceded them, of course, in the world. The whites and their offspring are by nature sexual deviants. So they seek to promote that disorder, that insanity, that perversity into our culture. It is not part of our culture. It never has been and never will be. Dissexuality is the term we use because dis means not. And when you're engaged in interfacing with the same sex, that is not sexuality. That is perverse. So it's not really same sex because sex is not taking place. So we utilize the term dissexual and so forth. Now, the whites and their offspring will show Hapi, they will show his images, and then they will say, well, because he's quote-unquote overweight, and it appears that he has quote-unquote pendulous breasts, and a large stomach midsection, especially down near the stomach area, but then the rest of his body looks normal, then that must mean he's androgynous, or it must mean that he's a transgender deity, a faggot deity. This is what the whites in their offspring put forward. They have even whole cults that they've created around the transgender deity Hapi, and they pretend like they're worshiping this deity. No deity, no Ntoro, no Ntorot, no male divinity, no female divinity, no Orisha, no Irumole, no Abosom, no Vodou, no Arusi, no deity has ever communicated with the whites in their offspring, and they never will. It is impossible, cosmologically impossible. The whites and their offspring are repelled by divinity. That means the great mother and great father of the supreme being, as well as all of the forces in nature, as well as every natural entity in creation, including us. They are repulsive to us. No different than two magnets on the table with the same polarities facing. They repel one another, and there's no changing of that reality. They don't decide one day after years of repelling that they've been too hard on one another and they're just going to come together at some point. It's an immutable reality. It's a cosmological reality. It's a spiritual, energetic reality. The whites and their offspring have no ka, no ka'et, no soul, no divine consciousness. Therefore, they are spirits of disorder, spirit without a ka or ka'et. And okra, as we call it in Akan, and inu, as they say in Yoruba, or say lido, as they say in Vodou. So when we're talking about ODWIRA, Purification Day, talking about ancestral religion, how it impacts every aspect of our lives. Ancestral religion is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. So through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to realign ourselves, thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order, and just thus realign ourselves with reality, restore balance to our lives. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. Jida, or purification, operationalizes nanason. Purification operationalizes our practice of incorporating law and restoring balance so that we can align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. And that, of course, impacts every aspect of our lives because that is our culture. The divine acceptance of order, the divine rejection or hatred of disorder. That is the way we operate as Afuraitkaitnit people, Afuraitkaitnit people only. So when we deal with these deities such as Hapi, these spirit forces in creation, and they have shrines within our own bodies. Each one of the divinities in creation has a shrine within our body. There's one major divinity that governs us. Then you have shrines for the various divinities, and they work interdependently, just like the various organs in your body. They have their own functions, but they work interdependently amongst one another to maintain the whole entity, which is you. You have spiritual organs within your body. These are shrines for the energy of the various deities that govern creation in a microcosm. They have relay stations for points of resonance so they can transfer their energy to you so you can operate in a harmonious fashion. So, and of course, Hapi is one of these divinities. The river of blood in your body is the same as the river of the Hapi or the Nile River in ancient Kemet, the major artery in the world, and you have major arteries within your body and so forth. This is what we're dealing with. And of course, there's the Hap, or the great Hapi, the river of stars in the sky. So whether it's the river of stars in the sky along the Milky Way, the major river arteries on Earth, or the major river arteries within your body, on every level, you have that spiritual force of Hapi, Hapi Met, and Hapi Reset, Hapi of the North, Hapi of the South, operating through these various expressions and features of creation. Of course, you have that river of energy moving from the base of the spine to the top of the head and all the way back down. That's the spiritual, energetic shrine house of Hapi. Now, the thing we want to talk about is the iconography of the divinity. We've talked about Hapi in previous broadcasts. We showed that in the language of ancient Kemet, the word for water is Mu. Hapi is called Mu Hap. The waters of Hap, when you're talking about the deity Hap Met, the northern Nile divinity. The Mu Hap Met is the waters Mu of Hap Met, the northern Nile. You have Mu Hap Reset meaning south. The southern Nile, the southern branch, the energy of the southern branch of the Nile. So you have Mu Hap Reset, meaning Mu waters, Hap Reset of the southern Nile. You have Mu Hap Met, Mu waters, and Hap Met, Hap of the north, Hap of the Met region, the north region. Of course, when the whites and their offspring invaded Kemet, they invaded the northern region. They became familiar with this deity that the Afuraitkaitnit people worshiped in Mu Hap Met. They corrupted the name Mu Hap Met into Muhammad and Muhammad. They began to claim was a white cracker walking around in Arabia. And then the brainwashed Negroes would say it was a black Arabian walking around. Of course, Muhammad or Muhammad never existed in any form or of any race. The overrunning of Hapi or Muhammad to bring abundance to the land and so forth is the overrunning of Muhammad and so forth. They stole the whole cosmology and transformed it into a narrative to fit their foolish political agenda, manufactured characters who never existed. We proved that in the Kukutuntum, the Ancestral Jurisdiction, one of our 20 books. I'm going into detail about who Muhammad is. We also did a broadcast talking about how Hap shows up in the Akan tradition, in the Ananse Sem, in the stories in the Akan tradition, in the cosmology. When you look at the Ananse Sem, the Ananse stories, you will find the various divinities that we've always worshipped, invoked, and so forth in ancient Kanat and Kemet, Nubian Egypt, and so forth, all the way up until today. Hap, or also pronounced Het, pronounced Chet in Akan, that divinity you find in the Anansi stories when Akwesi, Awusu, and Awuku Anansi are in a conflict about farmland, and they go to Nyokompon, who is Ra, the creator. Of course, Nyokompon is Ra'et, the creatress. And we have a book dealing with that, proving that Nyokompon and Nyokompon is Ra and Ra'et in ancient Kemet in the Akan tradition. When Akwesi Awusu and Awuku Anansi both have farms, and they go to Ra, Nyokompon, to judge between the two, to see who's going to have the fertile produce, because there was a famine in the land and so forth, and there was a drought. Nyokompon directs them to go to Chet, also pronounced Chet in Akan, Hep in ancient Kemet, or Ha in ancient Kemet. Go to this divinity and strike this divinity on the back with a stick. And when you strike him on the back with a stick, he was, quote unquote, hunchback. He had a rounded back, a rounded body, a disfigured body. When you struck him on the back, this is what they directed then. He would release the water, release the fertile water to make your crops fertile, to end the drought. So with Akwesi Awusu, which is actually Awusi Alsar, he went to Chep, the divinity Chep, and he took a stick and lightly hit the hunchback divinity, lightly tapped him on the back with a stick, meaning he struck him or provoked this divinity. Then his field was fully watered, and he overcame the drought. And everybody was wondering, how did his field become so well watered and fertile? Everybody else is suffering from drought. Then Awuku Anansi or Kweku Anansi, who was Set, Eshu, and so forth. Awuku Anansi and Akan, his field was damaged by drought and so forth, suffering from drought. So he found out what Akwesi Awusu did. He went to the hunchback, he went to Chet, and he took a huge stick and beat him to death, quote unquote, until he fell out. He was like, if I hit him hard enough, then my field is really going to be watered. What ended up happening was, Nyonkopon found out, Ra found out, and he punished Kweku Anansi, punished Awuku Anansi, and therefore Anansi's farm became known as the desert, while Akwesi Awusu farm became the fertile land. So this is how Akwesi Awusu or Awusi Awusir received the fertile land, the black land, and Kweku Anan Set from ancient Kemet received the desert. This is in Akan culture. Kweku Anansi, the trickster, the one who governs Wednesday and the planet Mercury, is also the owner of the desert, and they have a story talking about that. And Awusu, or Kwesi Awusu, governs the fertile land. In ancient Kemet, of course, also is called Kam, or the great black one. He governs the black land. And Set, of course, is called Desher, and he's the one who governs the red land or the desert. And that was adjudged ultimately by Ra that Set would receive the desert land. Asar would be given the black fertile land. So it's the exact same story, and it's the hunchback, disfigured body of the divinity that releases that fertile, life-giving water when you provoke that divinity. All contained within the Anansi Sim stories when you know what you're looking at and when you invoke these divinities. So we did a broadcast dealing with that in some detail. We want to get to a specific link, and that link is in the chat room right now. It's for the article that we published on the Abosom Abba, which is Nekabet in ancient Kemet. Abba and Akan, female divinity governing Thursday and the planet Neptune. So you have Yao, Ya, and Abba governing Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune. In the Akan tradition, governing Thursday, these are the celestial orbs that govern Thursday. Yao, Ya, and Abba, they're called Heru, Wachet, and Nekabet in ancient Kemet. They're called Shango, Oya, and Oba, the first wife of Shango. In the Yoruba tradition, they are called Hebioso, Abejida, and Ayaba in Vodou, these same three divinities. Nekabet, or Abba, is the one we're going to read from now. The article we have an article on each one of these deities that govern the 7 days of the week and who we're named after in our Khan culture. It's Kwesi and Kojo and Ajua and so forth. And not just day names, we're named after deities that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that animate the 7 days of the week. I'm going to read some information from Abba. She governs Neptune. There's a specific portion that we want us to get to dispel some myths. So we talk about her, and we talk about Nekabet and her function in creation and these various different things, and how Nekabet and Wachet govern the magnetosphere, and they're shown sometimes as winged cobra serpents, or sometimes Nekabet is shown as a great mother vulture and so forth with the outstretched wing, all these different things. But we want to get to a specific section. Scroll down so you can see that section. So if you look on page 11, we're talking about Nekabet and Wachet. They are tutelary divinities of the south and the north, just like Hapi Met and Hapi Reset, tutelary male deities of the south and the north, governing the river. And then you have Nekabet and Wachet governing the south and the north as well. And sometimes they're paired together in that fashion as husbands and wives and so forth. Now, it's very key because we want to talk about how the whites and their offspring have tried to make Hapi either an androgynous deity or just a dissexual or transgender deity, all this other nonsense. The information we're going to share is accurate information. The whites and their offspring, of course, do not have, and they don't have the capacity to get this kind of information because they have no capacity to communicate with the divinity. What's more important, of course, the whites and their offspring are going to lie even when they get the information from our broadcasts and publications and so forth. They're still going to distort the record. That's them because they're the enemy. What's most important is when you have self-proclaimed master teachers and quote-unquote babas and elders and elderesses and people calling themselves spiritualists. They've been involved in ancestral religion or the Yoruba tradition or Akan and Vodou and ancient Kemet, various expressions for years and decades, and running around teaching people these various things and talking about metaphysics and all this nonsense like Moorishism, that kind of idiocy, various different things, running around claiming to be knowledgeable about these cultures. But when it comes to these critical issues, they have no answer, and they repeat the nonsense of the whites and their offspring. So they betrayed their ignorance of the cosmology when they repeat the foolishness. So they begin to talk about Hapi as an androgynous deity. These are people claiming to be Afrocentric, claiming to be culturally grounded. People going back and forth to the continent as though that gave them some kind of credential or license to talk about ancestral religion, which it does not give you credentials at all. It means absolutely nothing. People studying language and studying various trutheries and so forth and memorizing a great deal of information and regurgitating it, having absolutely no knowledge of these deities, no experience with them at all. So therefore, they have no answer. You ask them about Hapi, and you need to look at these different individuals' responses. They've immortalized their ignorance online, in video, in print, and so forth. They have talked about Hapi, and they have called him an androgynous divinity. They've repeated exactly what the whites and their offspring have said till they get this broadcast tonight. When you look at what they said before tonight and afterwards, then you'll see that they had no knowledge of who he is, and they had to try to jump in front of the parade, get the information we put forward, and then pretend as though they knew it all along. But they have a record. So when you go back to that record, you'll see when they make the switch. And it's not just talking about Hapi, it's various other divinities as well. They were misinforming people for years, sometimes decades, until we put accurate information out. Then they drink that up, pretend as though they were teaching it all along, and then run along and start teaching that information very often verbatim and pretending as though they had it all along. But they have a record. You need to look at what people have said in the past. Don't look at what they're saying right now. Examine what every one of these people who are putting themselves forward as teachers, elders, eldresses, knowledgeable priests, priestesses, what did they say in the past about these deities? Because they have a record. They can't scrub the entire internet. They can't scrub every video they've ever done. They can't scrub everything they've ever written, published, talked about, every video they've appeared in, and so forth. Look at their record and look at how it changes once you look at the dates of the broadcasts we put out. We need to expose some of these misinforming individuals. Now, if you look on page 11, we're talking about Nekabet and Wachet. Sometimes it takes the form of winged cobras. As protectresses of the royal sovereignty of the South and North, they are also symbolized by the major plant of the Tawi of the two lands, the South and North. The papyrus plant, which is the Wach plant, represents the North, and thus Wachet, sedge plant, the Nekeb, represents the South, and thus Nekabet. There's an intimate connection between the South and North. The winged cobra form of Nekabet and Wachet, their representative plant life and their function in Abadier creation. So there's a symbol called the Sma Tawi, the union of the two lands. It's a representation of the trachea and the lung. So you see the trachea, you see the lungs at the bottom. On both sides of the trachea lung symbol, you see the watch plant, the papyrus plant. Then on the other side, you see the nekeb, the sedge plant, and they're tied together around the trachea lung complex. This is more than just a political statement of the union of the southern and northern Kemet, as well as the union of Knesset, Nubian Kemet, Egypt. Nekabet and Wachet are connected to the trachea lung complex. They operate through the electric and electromagnetic polar energy that generates the magnetosphere of Asasea for Earth and the magnetosphere of the body, the Kahibit, so-called aura, and the divine magnetosphere in Abadier in creation. So when you look at the plant life of the North and the South, and it's tied around, united around the trachea, that references the bronchial tree. And we have an image of the lung, set of lungs, and you can see through the lungs, and you can see the bronchial trees. So you see the trachea, you see the bronchial trees, and then you see the lungs encasing the bronchial trees. This is the representation of the Smai Tawi. You see the trachea, you see the lungs, but then you see the plants of the north and the south. Those represent the bronchial trees, and when you breathe in and out, there's also electromagnetic energy being drawn into those regions, expanding and contracting. that generates the energy or the jet stream around your body, just like there's a jet stream around the earth that's influenced by the magnetosphere and so forth, as well as the gravity of the sun and the moon and everything else. So the serpentine forms of Nekabet and Watchet reference the electromagnetic wave energy that is generated through the breath, the wind, circulated through the body, radiated from the body. So that's the serpentine form, which is the wave energy. Of course, the wings represents that air. The magnetosphere, grounded by our bodily northern and southern poles, is an atmosphere of energy that we can direct. When we transmit thoughts, vibrations are transmitted electromagnetically. When we increase or decrease our energetic output, emotional output, etc., the effects can be felt by others. When we direct our spiritual, mental energy properly, we can communicate via our energetic projection. On the most basic level, one can stare at an individual very intensely to the degree that the individual can, quote-unquote, feel someone staring at them. This is simply a matter of electromagnetic vibrations being transmitted from the individual to another through space. On another level, one can concentrate on an individual so intensely that the energetic projections are picked up by the magnetosphere of Asafe-Afu, the earth, and relayed to the individual one is concentrating on. The receiving individual may subsequently pick up a phone and call the transmitting individual. The transmitting individual will then reply, I was just thinking about you and you called. This is lower level electromagnetic transmission, and it's not unlike the transmission and reception utilized by cell phones, radios, television, signals, and so forth. And then on a higher level, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, African Black people only, can exercise this energy for the incorporation of divine law and the restoration of divine balance. Meaning we can attune to the Abosom and Samanto, heal ourselves, and various other things. So we show an image, we show an Adinkra image that represents the same Smai Tawi, the union of those two plants of the north and south tied around the bronchial, the tracheal, and the bronchial tubes are represented by that plant. And then we talk about the name Watchet and so forth, and the name Abba and these various different things. So that information is key about the transmission, also dealing with the lung, the heart and lung complex. Because now we get to the section that we want to first expose. There are two things that make the whites and their offspring say that Hapi is either androgynous or he's a quote-unquote transgender faggot and so forth, all that nonsense. Two things. Number one, he appears to have quote-unquote breasts. And they'll say, well, he has pendulous breasts just like a nursing mother. So therefore, he represents fertility and the fertility of the Nile. That's the first thing. Then the second thing that they show is his large stomach. And they'll say, well, oh, it looks like a pregnant stomach, and he's pregnant with the energy and the fertility of the Nile, and actually he's an androgynous deity representing fertility and everything else. Of course, that's nonsense. Then you have Negroes talk about he was originally a female divinity with a Mami Watu spirit, and then later on, the priests of Amen, who were, patriarchal, changed him from a female divinity to a male divinity. Of course, that's nonsense. Now, the first thing we're going to address is this whole notion of the quote-unquote breasts of Hapi, which is not really breast. And they see a large chest, and it looks like pendulous breasts and nipples and so forth, and they say, well, he must have female breasts, and then the rest of his body is male. Of course, that's not true. When you look at the picture that we showed as the promotional image for the show, we show a couple of images of Hapi. We show Hapi Reset and Hapi Met, the two Hapi divinities, twin divinities of the north and south. And then we show another image of Hapi when he's kneeling and he's actually bringing forth produce from the field. The first image of the northern and southern Hapi, they are actually holding the plant of the north and the plant of the south around the symbol of the Smai Tawi, and they're taking that position. When you look at them, you will see that he has, quote-unquote, a large chest that they will misrepresent as pendulous breasts, but then right up under that, there's more fat up under that as well. It almost looks like two breasts, but of course it's not. It's more fat. Then we show an image of a contemporary king on the continent. And he's sitting there with queen and so forth and his attendant, and he doesn't have a shirt on, and he's obese. And his chest looks exactly like Hapi. And his stomach is large and round and looks just like the deity Hapi. When you see an obese male without a shirt on, their chest or their pectorals look exactly like Hapi's quote-unquote breasts. So when Negroes see Hapi, and then later, of course, in late period sculptures and depictions and so forth, when the whites and the offspring, when the Greeks are there and the Romans are there and so forth, they begin to make Hapi's chest look more and more like breasts. If you look at earlier pictures, he's just a fat, overweight male. When you see a fat, overweight male like Rick Ross or something with no shirt on, you see his chest looks like breasts, looks just like Hapi. So, but here's the key. The whites and offspring, of course, know that, but they seek to misrepresent. Then you have brainwashed Negroes who think that they're metaphysical or they're, spiritually grounded or dealing with the occult and all of this idiocy, and they really have no knowledge at all, and they're embracing some dissexual, homosexual teachings like from the Nubian nonsense or some Moorish nonsense, and they're trying to weave all of this together, or some black woman is God idiocy. So they begin to repeat the stupidity of the whites and offspring, and then they simply blacken it up. So they start saying, well, a male is a degenerate female, which is pure stupidity, and it's actually a dissexual, homosexual doctrine. And deep within, individuals who promote that are leaning towards that dissexual identity anyway, and this is just a way for them to express themselves. And that's a reality, whether they want to admit it or not. Their behavior and their pseudo-analysis betrays them every time. So they'll say males are degenerate females, which is pure stupidity. They will say evidence of that fact that males have nipples just like females have nipples, and nipples are to nurse children. So originally all people were females, and then later on males were born, or females created males as toys for their own enjoyment. All this kind of stupidity coming from dissexual, homosexual, white males and females, and then black people pick it up and blacken it up. So we addressed this. If you look on page 14 in this article on Abba, we show Nekabet is also shown nursing the Per-A misnomer pharaoh. She is referred to as she of the pendulous breast. Here's the key, which they didn't have before we published this document. It is important to note the position of the nipples in relationship to the lung. The nipples of the female are channels for breast milk. However, this is their secondary, primary function of nipples in males and females is their electromagnetic function. The two nipples of males and females are positive and negative poles, similar to the positive and negative poles of a battery. We show a 9-volt battery with a positive and negative pole. The nipples of the male and female are the positive and negative poles in this region of the body. They are positioned over the lung. They receive and transmit electromagnetic energy, which has a stimulative effect upon the lung-heart complex, the nervous system, and contributes to the vibrancy of the kahibit, the so-called aura, human magnetosphere. This is their primary function. In this respect, the nipples function similar to the pupils of our eyes. The pupils of our eyes receive sunlight energy, which stimulates hormonal secretion, among other processes. The eyes also transmit energy. Of course, as we said before, you can stare at somebody, if somebody's staring at you, you're standing in line at the store and so forth, you can feel someone staring at you. Those electromagnetic projections are simply moving through space and hitting you. There's an electromagnetic energy governing our nervous system, electromagnetic impulses. There's electricity if you step on a carpet and touch a doorknob or touch somebody and you shock them. That's because your nervous system runs on electric energy, electromagnetic energy. Volts of electromagnetic energy moving through your body at all times. This is the reason when somebody has a heart attack, they take 2 electric pads rub them together and stay clear, and to jumpstart the nervous system, they send a rush of electromagnetic energy, electricity, into the body, because your nervous system runs off of electromagnetic energy. So when you stare at somebody, you're simply projecting the electromagnetic energy that's moving through you all the time anyway, projecting some of that. They can feel it because it moves through space and it hits them, picked up by their magnetosphere, and they feel it. The eyes receive sunlight or energy, process that, hormonal secretions result, but the eyes also transmit energy. The above medulla hieroglyph with the circle with the dot in the middle is used to represent the Aten, the sun, to represent Ra and Ra'at. We're going to some imagery about that. Now, just want to scroll down real quick. All right. And then we show some more hieroglyphs dealing with that as well. So, the primary function, for example, of your nose is to breathe. Of course, if your nose was closed up and the mouth and so forth, if you didn't breathe, you die. The secondary function of the nose, and if you smell and you can discern the different smells, and that affects hormonal secretions as well. You can smell something, it can make you nauseous. You can smell something through quote-unquote aromatherapy. It can help stimulate a healing effect. That's the secondary function. Even if your sense of smell is not operant because you're sick and you're congested and so forth, and you have a virus or whatever, and you're going through some stuff for a couple of days because you haven't been taking care of yourself, even if your sense of smell is not operant, that's a secondary function. You can go without the sense of smell for a while, but you cannot go without the primary function, which is breathing. The primary function of, the mouth has more than one function. You receive air through the mouth, you eat food through the mouth, that's ingesting, that's receiving, but you also transmit through the mouth, of course, sound waves, vibrations, energy, and so forth. The sound vibrations that emanate from the individual. Sound vibrations can be sung at such a pitch that someone can sing and break a glass, sing a high note and break a glass, or a low note and break a glass. Energy is transmitted from the mouth, received by the mouth. Primary and secondary function. The same thing with the eyes, the same thing with the nipples. It's a primary function, is the reception and transmission of electromagnetic energy as a positive and negative pole directly over the lungs, which means directly over the bronchial tubes, meaning directly over the plant of the north and the plant of the south, the watch plant and the Nekeb plant within your system, the plants governed by Wachet and Nekebet, directly connected to your electromagnetic field, your magnetosphere. When someone says, for example, somebody has heart, or they're a strong person, they have courage, and you can feel, you walk by the person, you can feel that kind of courage or heart or energy from them and so forth, and you have somebody else who's very weak, and you can actually feel that weakness in their aura and so forth, the weak projections and so forth. Where the projections come from. You know about the projections with the eyes because someone can stare at you. You can feel the direct projection. You know exactly where it's coming from. But when someone has this kokoduru, as it's called in our Khan, a heavy chest, or has heart, strong, powerful, courageous, and so forth, where is that expansive, fiery energy coming from? Yes, it's coming from the heart pumping and the lungs filled with energy, but what are the poles of transmission that transmits that heavy, strong, powerful energy out from the individual? It hits you and you can feel their strength and power in their heart, that heaviness and power of their spirit. It comes from those two poles, which are the quote-unquote nipples, the positive and negative poles that's directly over the lung, where the life force energy is processed after it's breathed in and transmitted throughout the body. So when you see Hapi and you see the quote-unquote breast, he's an overweight male. His chest is quote-unquote flabby. So that's why it looks like quote-unquote breast. But when you see even sometimes electromagnetic energy, not water pouring from the nipples of Hapi, you notice it's not a stream of water pouring from his nipples. It's always a wavy line of energy every now and then. It's rare that you see that particular depiction, but even when you see that, a wavy line of energy, an electromagnetic wave pouring from the nipple of Hapi, not just a curvy line of water, because he's not nursing anyone. the electromagnetic energy coming from the nipples or the pole, the primary function of the nipples. That's what's happening. That stimulates our lungs throughout the course of our lives. Women can breastfeed for a certain number of years, but you have nipples there throughout the course of your life. These are poles of energy to stimulate lung processes, stimulate your magnetosphere. That's what they're for, no different than your ears, eyes, nostrils, and so forth. They receive and transmit energy. The poles in the body, on the chest, the nipples, and so forth, that's what they're for. In the most important region, the heart-lung complex. You can lose a kidney, you can lose a spleen, you can lose something else. You can't lose your heart and lung complex. The most important vital organ in the lower region, just like the brain is the most important organ in the upper region. This notion that Hapi is androgynous because he's obese, quote unquote, and his chest looks like breasts, but they're really not. And then electromagnetic wave coming from his nipples that they assume must have to do with fertility and nursing, but in reality is dealing with the projection coming from those poles that stimulate the nervous system rooted in the heart and lung complex. This is what we're dealing with. So that lays that to rest. And the stupidity about the fact that a male has nipples must mean he used to be a female, pure idiot. And it's especially coming from so-called spiritualists who try to repeat the nonsense of the whites and their offspring, who say that everybody starts off as a female, even in utero, and eventually, they become males and females later, but everybody starts off as a female. Pure stupidity. And it's usually coming from pseudo-metaphysicians, pseudo-occultists, pseudo-spiritualists, yet at the same time they talk about being involved in ancestral religion. So how can everyone start off as a female when you claim to be communicating with your ancestresses and ancestors? If you really were, you would understand that you communicate with female spirits, male spirits before they even enter into the womb. So the gender exists before they get into the womb. So how can they start off as a female if they were a female or a male prior to entering into the womb? They're male and female, Abosom, Orisha, Vodou, divinities, and so forth. So when you really have a connection with Nyamewa and Nyame, the great female divinity, the great male divinity, and the various other divinities who are children of Nyamewa, Nyame, Amenet, and Amen, you have an actual connection. You're really communicating with the ancestors and ancestors. You know that gender began in the spirit realm and is crystallized in the physical realm. These perverts will want to make you believe that spirit is genderless and colorless and all this other nonsense, and that only takes place in the physical world. That's pure stupidity. So we've proven that here. Now the second reason they will try to say that Hapi is androgynous, they can't deal with it with regard to the chest because he's simply an obese male. Then they'll say, well, he has a large stomach like a pregnant woman, so therefore that must mean that he's androgynous and he's transgender, and that large stomach represents fertility and fertility of the river. And in fact, maybe he used to be a female divinity and they changed it around for political reasons. Pure stupidity once again. As we show, the chest or the nipples with regard to Hapi has nothing to do with the fertility of the Nile or nursing at all. It has to do with electromagnetic energy. And this is why they pair Hapi of the south and Hapi of the north with Wachet, which is in the north, and Nekabet, which is in the south, talking about the magnetosphere, the winged serpent divinities. Their wings deal with the jet stream and the wind in the atmosphere, powered by their wave bodies, serpentine bodies, undulating and so forth. That's the wave energy, the magnetic energy, and then, of course, you have the wings dealing with that electric energy within the magnetosphere. They're regulating and protecting the north and the south. The north from foreign invasion, the south from internal strife and division and so forth, maintaining balance within the culture. So they are paired. Hapi of the north, Hapi of the south, Wachet in the north, Nekabet in the south. They are paired together. So that has nothing to do with fertility of the land in that regard. When you talk about fertility of the land and the river itself, you're talking about the two female deities, Merit, Shema, and Merit Met. Merit, the goddess of the inundation of the north, Merit Met, and Merit Shema, Merit of the south, the female divinity of the inundation of the river of the south. And Merit Met, Merit of the north, and Merit Shema, Merit of the south, the two female Nile River divinities are also paired with Hapi as well. And that's when you're talking about fertility when it's connected with them. Why don't the whites in Nile Spring focus on Merit Shema and Merit Met as the fertile inundation divinities as opposed to Hapi? Because they want to try to make him into something androgynous. Now, what about his large stomach? Some people try to say, well, that has to do with being the cauldron and the chi energy and all of this other stuff, which is really not. Now, we're going to pull some information down. And when you understand the cosmology, you understand greater who Hapi really is. We talked about Hap, or the great river of stars in the sky. Hapi on earth, the longest river on earth, great artery on earth. Within your body, you have the great river of blood within your body, the major arteries within your body. And then within your spirit body, you have that major river of energy going up the spine and down and so forth. This is what we're talking about. So Hap, or the great Hap in the sky, the river of stars in the sky, that quote-unquote heavenly Nile, Hapi in the sky and so forth, that illuminates stars and planets and everything else. This is the great river, and Hapi is the great river, the longest river on earth. Now, if you were to depict, exaggerate certain features, if you were drawing a picture of somebody and you wanted to let people know that they were tall, you may draw their legs unusually long and say, okay, this is a really tall person. Or if you're trying to show that this was one of the Twa people or Ba or Ka people, so-called pygmies, then you would show their legs unusually short to let the people know, oh, this is a really small person. If you want to show someone who was large and had great influence, you may show a part of their body unusually large, like the stomach, to show, oh, this is a big man. It's not just a small person. He's big, he's large, he has influence, he's containing some kind of force and some kind of power. What is he maintaining? And we're just talking about chi energy at the root chakra and so forth. No, it's not. So now, the cosmology of Hapi, and this is the second piece that none of these pseudo-elders and eldresses ever understood about Hapi until we are releasing it now. So again, check their past record up until this moment. Hapi, you look at the river in ancient Kemet, it very rarely rains in ancient Kemet. And because of that, the entire economy and the lives of the people were dependent on the inundation of the river. If the river didn't inundate or swell at the right time, right height, and so forth, to water the fields and bring that black silt and deposit it on the banks of the river, then the people wouldn't have any black silt to plant their crops in, and the people would suffer and die. There's a famine, stele, and so forth talking about that. When the river didn't rise to its proper height within 7 years, they had to go to the source of Hapi and connect with Kunwimu, the deity Kunwem, who releases the energy of Hapi in the waters of Hapi. And because of the shrines of the deity had been ignored, then the waters were not released, and they went to Kunwimu and then reconnected with the Ancestral Religion, and then the flow of the river was released by Kunwimu, and abundance came back to the community, to the nation, and so forth. So there's a text dealing with that with the famine still. When the river swells, it overruns the banks. The entire country, so to speak, is covered by water for a number of weeks, a couple of months, and so forth. And then eventually the water recedes. And once the water recedes, then the black land emerges. Because when the water was inundating, when the field, the land was being inundated by the water, the black silt was carried from the south and carried throughout the land and deposited on the banks of the river. So that rich, black, fertile soil was deposited on the banks of the river, and when the water began to recede months later, all of this rich black silt was deposited and now you could go plant your seeds in that fertile black silt. That means Kam, or the great black one. Alsar was deposited on the bank of the river and so forth. And then you could plant your crops, and then months later, then you will have a great deal of abundance with regard to crops and so forth. So the water inundates, but then the water recedes. So that lasts for a few months, and then the water recedes. And once the water recedes, it's Hapi is quote-unquote sleeping for a while, but then later on when it's time, later in the year, when it's time for Hapi to return, to begin that cycle once again, then he swells up once again. He gets big, he swells up, powerful and so forth, in connection with Medi, Shema, Medi, Met, and so forth, and then the water inundates, bringing that abundance, bringing that which would later become abundance. First is burying the entire country, and the country appears to be dead. That's why it's called Ta Meri, the submerged land or the dead land. Everything is buried under the flood. And the entire country is flooded, and it's 600 miles worth of, and 12 miles wide, 10 to 12 miles wide, and 600 miles long, covering the entire country. That's not a place where you want to be if you're living in that region, because everything is submerged. Everything has died. But then months later, then the land, the black land, resurrects, emerges from that water. It's the resurrection of Alsar and so forth, the resurrection of the land. So Ta Meri is not just the inundated land, but the buried land, the dead land, and that's why Meri means dead, and so forth. And we deal with that, and More means dead. So once that quote-unquote death occurs, that's the precursor to resurrection at some point, months later, when that death occurs, when the waters begin to recede, Hapi begins to recede, then he goes to sleep for a while, and then months later, he rises up again and swells up again. Now, you should have an idea of what we're talking about now, and it's not talking about fertility. It's talking about hibernation. Hapi goes into hibernation. This is why he has a swollen stomach and a swollen body. Why would he have a swollen stomach and a swollen body? Let's go through the 5 stages of activity in hibernation. The annual cycle of the black bear activity in hibernation has 5 stages. Hibernation, walking hibernation, normal activity, hyperphagia, and fall transition. So the stages differ in biochemistry, physiology, appetite, and level of activity. The onset and duration of the stages are genetically programmed to fit regional norms of food availability, which differ across America. So we can get into, we're going to go through these things kind of quickly. Experimental studies with captive bears revealed the following. Stage 1, hibernation is a continuous dormancy. True hibernation, other animals have where they're just totally asleep straight for 6 months, don't move. Then you have bears, actually, they have what's called, it is a form of hibernation. It's not the quote-unquote true hibernation, but it's called torpor. They don't mention that in this particular article, but the torpor is a form of hibernation. But in general, stage 1, hibernation is a continuous dormancy with distinct decreases in heart rate and metabolic rate. Bears use up to 4,000 kcal per day, mainly body fat, but do not eat, drink, urinate, or defecate. So while they're hibernating, we're in that torpor period, they do not drink. While they're sleeping, they do not drink, eat, urinate, or defecate. They can reduce oxygen consumption and metabolic rate by half and breathe only once every 45 seconds. Heart rate can drop periodically to 8 to 21 beats per minute, and blood flow to skeletal muscle, particularly the legs, can be reduced by 45% or more, making some bears slow to arouse and run away in winter. Blood perfusion rates of peripheral tissues can fall below levels needed for aerobic metabolism in humans. So what's happening here, that's stage 1, the hibernation. Stage 2 is walking hibernation. It's the 2 to 3 weeks following the emergence when the metabolic processes adjust to normal summer levels. During walking hibernation, bears voluntarily eat and drink less than they will during normal activity. 3 is normal activity, typically lasts from green up in spring to the onset of hyperphagia in midsummer or fall, depending upon the region. During this stage, bears with unlimited food eat 5,000 to 8,000 kcal per day. If they are denied water and food during this stage, they cannot duplicate hibernation responses. Instead, they become dehydrated, utilize muscle for energy, and accumulate nitrogenous waste in the blood, which can be fatal. Hyperphagia is a period of excessive eating and drinking to fatten for hibernation. Black bears with unlimited food and water ate 15,000 to 20,000 kcal per day, as opposed to 5,000 to 8,000 kcals per day, and drank several gallons. Large amounts of water are needed to process the large amounts of food and rid the body of nitrogenous waste. Daily urine volumes for 2 bears with 2 to 4 gallons, and they go through some things with that. Stage 5, fall transition, is a period after hyperphagia when the metabolic processes change in preparation for hibernation. Bears voluntarily eat less but continue to drink to purge body waste. They become increasingly lethargic, resting 22 or more hours per day, often near water. Active heart rates fall from 80 to 100 per minute to 50 to 60 per minute, and sleeping heart rates fall from 60 to 80 per minute to less than 22 per minute. Now, we're going to give you another piece with regard to that, just so you can understand better what we're talking about. You can pull this information in various places. Pull up this one specific site. And here's one of them. It's a common misconception that bears hibernate during the winter. While bears tend to slow down during the winter, they are not true hibernators. Black bears, grizzly bears, and brown bears do go into a deep sleep during the winter months, known as torpor. Hibernation is when animals sleep through the winter. During the sleep, the animals will not wake up when they hear a loud noise, even if they are moved or touched. While in torpor, the animal can wake up quickly and easily. During true hibernation, the animal's dormant state or torpor, their heart rate is extremely low, but their body temperature is relatively high. They won't eat or release bodily waste. Animals hibernate as a way to adapt to their surroundings. They have to be able to survive the cold weather. They hibernate to escape the cold and because food is scarce. To get ready for hibernation, animals will eat more than usual during the fall to store up body fat. During hibernation and torpor, they will use up this extra body fat to live off of while not losing any muscle. This allows the animal to come out of hibernation thinner and still as strong as it was before winter. They will get back their dens ready for hibernation during the late fall. So they go into some more information about that. And then there's one more specific piece that we wanted to pull up. Just give me a second about that. And for those if you have any questions or comments, phone line, you can hit the number 1. And if you want to interact in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact in the chat room. If you don't have a username, you can sign up for one quickly in Blog Talk, and you can interact in Blog Talk in the chat room. Okay, so we had a couple of, there was one particular piece. We just want to pull some sticks out real quick. Just one more second. I'm pull some facts out real quick. All right. Now, all right. So people will ask, do black bears hibernate? The short answer is yes, even though there's really the torpor. And people define hibernation simply in terms of temperature reduction. They're not considered hibernators. However, when biologists discovered the many metabolic changes that let black and grizzly bears hibernate up to 7.5 months without eating, drinking, urinating, or defecating, They realize that body temperature is only a small part of hibernation, and so they go into some more detail about that. So they generate this brown fat. They generate this fat. They eat 3 times as much as they would normally eat because they're going to be hibernating for a number of months. They generate this body fat, so while they're sleeping, this is true of other animals who hibernate as well, they're sleeping for months. And the true hibernators, even if you walk over and kick them and push them and so forth, they will not wake up. Sometimes they appear dead. They're sleeping for months. No urination, no defecating, no eating, no drinking, none of that. Because they filled their bodies up. They don't have to defecate because nothing is going through the digestive. Their body processes the urea and everything and breaks it down into amino acids and all of that. So, because they fatten themselves, then they can live off of that fat while they're hibernating. Hapi swells up when it has to do with the inundation of the river, but at some point the river recedes. There's no rainfall and so forth. Hapi is hibernating for a number of months until it's time for that inundation once again. He begins to expand and operate and flow through the land once again. So he's the quote-unquote big man. He has the power. He's containing all of this energy, this food, this fuel, all of these resources contained within him so he can make it throughout that period when he's quote-unquote sleeping. Same thing with regard to us. When we incorporate energy, we engage in ritual processes, not only just on a mundane level, eating food and taking in the nourishment that we need so we can operate. Once we're not eating, we can utilize that food for fuel, for energy. But we engage in ritual processes and invoke the Abosom, provoke their energy. The response to us is a transmission of energy. We fill ourselves up with that so we can operate on the energy that we've provoked with them. We can contain that energy within shrines, contain that energy within amulets, contain that energy within the shrines within our own bodies. We contain that energy within the shrines in our own bodies, and we, quote-unquote, swell up. We get, quote-unquote, big. We get, quote-unquote, huge. That energy is within us. That includes spirit possession, or even when we're engaged in ritual processes, when we talked about last night, for example, talking about Vodou and the mojo and jackball and so forth, and we talked about the moja and ajapadiate in our kana, where that comes from, when we're utilizing these talismans, amulets, ritual containers of energy and so forth externally. We do the same thing internally. So when you're looking at Hapi and his large stomach, looking at an obese man, he's not just containing a great deal of food. This is talking about Hapi, the one who goes into hibernation. He becomes, quote-unquote, fat for a while. And every time that cycle takes place throughout the course of the year where the river swells, overruns the country, eventually deposits the black silt, then the waters recede, and then the river goes to sleep for a while, and then months later, the river swells up and rises up once again. This is that life cycle of hibernation. We even have that life cycle when you go to sleep. That's a form of hibernation. You're laid out. You're not moving for a number of hours and so forth. You're not focused on the external world. You're focused totally internally. Even if somebody pushes you, you're still not moving. Heart rate slows down, all of that. You're hibernating, so to speak, for 8 hours, and then you rise up, and then you're functioning and active and so forth. In the same fashion, we have cycles of energy that we take advantage of. This is why we have holidays, ritual holidays, take advantage of the energy coming from specific divinities who are active at certain times because they're governed by different aspects of nature, whether it's the swelling river or the summer solstice or the equinoxes or the winter solstice or different constellations at different points in the sky at different times, affecting the earth in a certain way. All these different things play a part in these different cycles. And Hapi is dealing with that hibernation cycle. This is why he has a round stomach. This is why he flabs, so to speak. He takes on that quote-unquote brown fat like the bears do, packing on that fat so he can feed off of that energy while he's hibernating. Now, understanding that cosmology, now we're going to read what the whites and offspring have to say about Hapi. And then we're going to contrast real cosmology is what the whites and their offspring have to say about Hapi. So one of these sites the whites and offspring put forward, they're trying to call Hapi a transgender deity and all this other nonsense. They say the Ntor, the deity associated with the annual inundation of the Nile, they say here on this site is the transgender deity Hapi. To their mind, they say to our mind, they're saying they believe to the minds of the ancient Egyptians, Hapi is one of the most wonderful and beautiful of the Ntorou, the dead. Hapi's most distinctive attribute is his bluish-green skin. Of course, that's the color of the river. And a towering headdress consisting of papyrus and lotus plants, which seems to shoot out of the crown of Hapi's head the way those plants do from the waters of the Nile. And of course, we're talking about the southern plant and the northern plant. Then the crackers say, these faggots and dykes say, as a transgender deity, Hapi has a robust male physique with athletic legs, narrow waist, broad shoulders, and sinewy arms. But Hapi also has the pendulous breasts of a nursing mother and the round belly of an expectant one. Sometimes Hapi has the short cropped hair of a man, but more often Hapi is depicted with the long hair cascading over both shoulders, almost to the waist. Very strikingly, Hapi effortlessly holds before him herself these faggots and dykes said because his chest was fat and flab, and it's not just his quote-unquote pectorals. If you look up under his pectorals, you also see the rest of his body midsection is fat. There are rolls of fat, and then his stomach is wide as well. It's round as well. So it's not just the chest. You look at any obese black man, it looks exactly like Hapi. But the key is because his pectorals look like quote-unquote breasts, as they say, and because his stomach is round, they say he has the breasts of a nursing mother and the belly of a expectant pregnant mother. And therefore, he must be a faggot, he must be a transgender, and all that other idiot. Pseudo-elders and eldresses calling themselves Kemetic, teaching the reading and writing of the language, going back and forth to Kemet for years, sometimes decades, traveling, study groups and so forth, having little priesthoods and priestesshoods, people calling themselves Yoruba and Khan and Vodou and everything else, and professors and spiritualists and PhDs, whatever they want to call themselves. These fools are repeating this same dissexual nonsense about Hapi, and they seek to blacken it up because they do not have answers, because they know nothing about the cosmology, because they've never invoked Hapi Met or Hapi Reset or Meri Shema or Meri Met, the wives of Hapi. They don't know who these deities are because they have no relationship with them. They're in a dilemma because they read this information from the whites and their offspring. They embrace the whites and their offspring analysis. Then they're embarrassed by the analysis because they're like, well, we've been teaching the culture of ancient Kemet, and now it turns out we have an androgynous deity. Now what are we going to say to the people without them being turned off by it? So then they try to fashion some pseudo-metaphysical answer about who Hapi is and why he has quote-unquote breasts and a large stomach. And then they start talking about, well, it represents androgyny, and that's a sacred, mystical man and the black woman in balance, and we were people of balance and ma'at, and all this other nonsense. And he represents the, importance of fertility for the female as well as the virility of the male. See, you got to understand about, shut up. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. These Negroes have no knowledge whatsoever. They have no clue about the nature of hibernation, the nature of that packing on of quote-unquote fat for the river divinity who shows up for a certain time of the year, then he goes to sleep for a certain time of the year, holding and containing that energy just like you contain it in an amulet or a talisman so it can be used later to either attack your enemies or heal yourself and heal your community. We know how to hibernate energy. That's a ritual process. he represents that ritual process. It has nothing to do with fertility of the land and virility of the land in that regard. They have no knowledge of what the primary function of the nipples are, as they are two poles over the lungs, over the northern and southern plant, the bronchial tubes that stimulate the magnetosphere within our bodies because of the life force energy circulating through the breath. We breathe into the bronchial tubes. The expansion and contraction of the lungs are the fanning of those flames and so forth. And then once you send that life force energy circulating through your magnetosphere, you have those bronchial tubes of the plant of the south and north, Watchet and Nekabet, operating through those two plants. And then you have Hapi Met and Hapi Reset connected with Watchet and Nekabet in the north and the south, pumping that energy within your system through the bloodstream. Bloodstream is connected to the lungs and the heart. Of course, you have, when you have the heart pumping blood through, leaving the left side of the heart, going throughout the system, then it gets to the right side of the heart, and then it goes into the lung tissue and so forth. It is oxygenated, purified, and so forth, and then sent back into the left atrium and then down into the left ventricle, so it can be sent out into the eastern side of the body, and then it sets in the west, the right side of the heart, and so forth, and goes through that process. So the lungs purify the blood. Your blood are coming through the arteries, through the heart, and so forth, connected with the lungs. That's the blood of Hapi, connected with the arteries, the major arteries within the body, connected to Heru sitting in the heart, connected to Watchet and Nekabet within the bronchial tubes of the lungs, the expansion and contraction of the lungs, with the flapping of those wings, of those two winged serpents, of electromagnetic energy of their wavy, undulating bodies, serpentine bodies, and so forth. That's the electromagnetic energy in the air and the blood circulating through your body, going from cycle to cycle to cycle. But Hapi is dealing with hibernation. This is why he has the breast and so forth, and the large stomach. Until we put this information out tonight publicly, none of these pseudo-teachers and pseudo-elders and eldresses had a morsel of it. Now, look from this point on and see how it unfolds. Okay, we're going to take a couple of okay, so in the chat room, comments. Hold on one second. Chat room, there's a comment. It's too funny because this just betrays the Achiwadipo's true understanding of Nana-Sama or ancestral religion. I was just looking at some quote-unquote Afrocentric scholars indeed agree with the Achiwadipo, the white and offspring spirit of disorder info regarding Hapi. And when you look more into it, you'll find it. As well as pseudo-priests and priestesses, whether they're Mami Wata, whether they're, different forms of Vodou or Yoruba, Akan, Congo, whatever they follow, whatever they call themselves, they have no idea what they're talking about. Same thing, somebody mentioned Malidoma Some. He promotes dissexuality, homosexuality. That's what he is. Okay. So we're going to go to the phone line real quick. We have a couple of calls. For the people who came in a little bit later, we did mention, we had an announcement. We had mentioned the deadline for those who would like to place ads in our ODWIRA book journal that is going to be released next week at our conference on June 24th. It'll also be online and so forth. We have a little bit more space. We're in the formatting phase right now, so we have a little bit more space for about 10 more ads or so. So if you didn't get a chance to submit an ad for your business, organization, institution, you would like to place an ad in our journal. So all the people who received the book at the conference, as well as we're going to end up having 3 million hits on our website this year. That the ebook version of the journal will be there, so you will have millions of hits on the website. You have thousands and thousands of people who will see the book, download the book, see your ad and so forth, whether it's your business, your organization, your institution, your study group, whatever you want to place. So if you still want to do that, you can do that ASAP. Send the JPEG files, go to the ODWIRA page on our website. You can look in the chat room. It's posted on ODWIRA.com and on Facebook and so forth. You'll see the link to ODWIRA conference. We'll be dealing with Amaniye nationism, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit nationism, purification of nationalism. So all-day event, free event, 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. Friday is a sacred Friday, Api Dam Fida, a sacred ancestral Friday, which is June 24th. All-day event, free and open to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people only. But if you'd like to place an ad, you can do so. But you have to send those files ASAP because we have to finish the formatting, which we're in the midst of doing now, so we can begin to publish next week and have the book printed out and ready for the event. Okay. So, give me 1 second. I'm just going to pull this information up. And we're going to put the link. We'll put the link back in the chat room right quick for the ODWIRA Afashe page. All right. Talking about the conference, you'll see we added another presenter, Dr. Iya Ajwa. We'll be dealing with the support systems, educational support systems for ODWIRA. So when you look on the flyer, you see we've updated the flyer and added her on. So we have 4 presenters so far. We have 1 more to confirm. So, and we also, in the process, as far as raising funds for the free conference, we have a special on our 5 books for $40. We always have the 5 books for $40 as a special. We have 20 books out. They range between $8 and $11. The first 5 books you can purchase as a special, 5 books for $40. And then any order of 10 books or more is automatically 30% off. But normally it's the first 5 books for $40. This special we're having during this period for the conference, leading up to the conference, when you hit that 5 books for $40 button, you can choose any combination of 5 books, any one of those 20 titles that we have. You don't have to just receive the first 5 if you already have those 5 books, or if you were interested in like books like More Means Dead or the Coco Bo books dealing with dissexuality, homosexuality was never accepted in ancient Kemet, or Off the Origin of the Term Yoga, Karakasa, The Origin and Nature of the Chakra, or different publications, or the Hoodoo books and so forth. Any combination of those 5 you can get with regard to the 5 books for $40. I'll put the link in the chat room. And that's just special during this time leading up to the conference. So if you would like to place that order, just go to the publications page on my page. You'll see the special. You see the video talking about 5 books for $40 in Homa Anun. And then you'll see the special button. You just click that. When you go into PayPal and click the button, write in the comments section which 5 books you would like. Or you could also email us and let us know which 5 books you prefer. And we can move forward like that. That is a way to support the work we're doing. You'll receive the immediate benefit of receiving your 5 books in the mail, but at the same time, you're also assisting us in doing these free conferences. Every presentation we do in any city, we never charge an admission fee. We do not charge a speaker's fee to organizers of our events. So everybody can come to our events for free, our people only, of course. We also give away a free copy of one of our softcover books to everyone who attends our event. So everybody comes to the event for free. They also receive one of our books for free. And we've done that everywhere we've gone. So we've given away over 860 books over a recent period all across the country. We want to continue that process. We're going to do the same thing at the conference this next Friday on June 24th. So the way to cover those costs is when you purchase books, you're assisting us in that process. It's all part of our institutional effort. So, Yeda said, we thank you to those who have purchased books. And if you would like to support the work we're doing, go to the Nhoma page, and you can do that. All right, we're going to go to the phone line real quick. Okay, Michelle, on the phone line, you had a question or a comment? On the phone line, question or comment?
Michiyama. Can you hear me?
Michelle, what's up? Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks for that explanation on Hapi. I never heard that before. But what I was wanted to ask, my question was the Hapi. Does it associate with the zodiac with the Aquarius water bearer?
Yeah, so that's where they get the water bearer from. So when you see, and you'll see very clearly, sometimes you'll see the water bearer with 1 vessel, sometimes you'll see the water bearer with 2 vessels pouring out water. And when you look in the iconography of Hapi, you'll see him standing there pouring out 2 vessels of water into the river to cause it to inundate, swell, and so forth. That's what Aquarius is. That's exactly where they stole the imagery and the function and everything.
Okay. Now, my other question is, I was reading about the Gregorian calendar, and I remember on one of your lectures and video you did speak on Julius Caesar changing the times and the days. And in this Gregorian calendar, it said something about there was 2 days taken away. Like they took away 2 days or something out of the days of the week, and then there's something like a galactic calendar, and I was wondering that with the galactic calendar, is that an African thing? And with the Gregorian calendar, if that's 2 days that they took away, was there once before in in ancient times, was there 9 days of the week?
Okay, so now when they talk about taking 2 days away, or more, actually more than that, they weren't talking about the days of the week. In that regard, we're talking about Julian and Augustus Caesar and people going back and forth and all that when they're dealing with the calendars. They're talking about the month. So you'll have, instead of having a 30-day month, some months have 31 days and some have 30, and some, July named after Julian and August named after Augustus and all this other stuff. They're adding months to make their months as long as the previous ruler and all this other nonsense and making some other months shorter. So that whole Gregorian calendar is based off of, but it's a corruption of the civil calendar in ancient Kemet as well as the quote-unquote Celtic calendar in ancient Kemet, but it's not the same thing. So we had in Kemet, Nile Valley, Hapi Valley, 12 months of 30 days, 3 weeks of 10 days each, around, as far as the valley, because it was a different structure. Naturally, it was different with regard to the seasons and everything else because it very rarely rained in Kemet. So everything was based on, they had 3 different seasons, the Peret season and the Aket season and the Shemu season and so forth. 4 months for each season, for 3 weeks and 10 days based on the constellations that were rising and setting every 10 days and so forth. So that's the basis of that civil calendar. The White Nile Spring, and so it was 360 days, and then they had 5 intercalary days, which was connected to Asar, Aset, Set, and Nebuchadnezzar and Herubehudet and so forth. So that's where they get 365 days from. As far as the civil calendar, we also have that Celtic calendar, so-called Celtic calendar connected with Sephatit, the rising of Sephatit, the star Sephatit, so-called misnomer Sirius of Sothis. It happens once every 365 and a quarter days. It gives that precise, post-precise year. So the White Nile Spring saw that we had these calendars. They imitated those. They changed the months. The names of the months, of course, they switched and added extra days based on what they wanted to do and took other days away from other months, and it began to become corrupt. So, but then you have other groups, that weren't in the Nile Valley per se, Hapi Valley per se. You have people in the western Libyan desert, people in southwest and different places who had a different week, 7-day week. You have other people on the continent have a 6-day week, 4-day week, 4-day market week, different things like that. So depending on where they are, cycles that they're focused on. If you're in Kemet and there is no rain, no clouds in the sky, and you're watching the rising and setting of these various constellations and you focus on them every 10 days, you do it that way. If you're focused, you're in a savanna region, and later moving to a forest region, but in the savanna region, like our people were when we migrated away from Kemet, moved west through the so-called western Libyan desert, all the way across to the ancient empire of Ghana and so forth. And we're in a savanna region, but then partially a desert region, but then savanna regions as well. And you focused on the movement of the sun, moon, and the different planets. Then we have that 7-day week, the same 7-day week that we had for thousands of years on the continent, away from the quote-unquote Hapi Valley. That same Kanitu or Nubians who migrated up along the western quote-unquote desert up into Kemet. Some of our people stayed in Kemet, but some of our people went up into the so-called Near East. Of course, we were the first people in Southern Europe. Went up into the Near East. We carried that 7-day calendar up there based on the sun, moon, and the planet and their cyclical manifestations. And this is where the Kanitu, or so-called Nubians, met when they settled in the region of what is later called Sumer, the Sumerians and so forth. And they have the 7-day week that's very popular. And later on it becomes Babylon, and then the Europeans invade, and they learn about the 7-day week from the Sumerians, quote-unquote Babylonians, and then later they instituted, and they only instituted much later because the Romans had an 8-day market week, which came from the black Etruscans in that area. Later on, they accepted the 7-day week that they learned from the Babylonians. The Babylonians learned from the original Sumerians and so forth, which were Nubian Kanitu, who migrated up there from the western Libyan desert and so forth. So different groups have different calendars based on whether they're looking at the planet, whether they're looking at the phases of the moon, whether they're looking at the, solar phases and so forth, different things.
Okay, the galactic calendar, is that an African thing? Galactic.
Now, say it again. You said galactic?
It's galactic, GAL, is that TIC. Is that an African thing, or is that calendar? Is that something just, something new way?
You said galactic? You said galactic as in like galaxy, galactic?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, now,
yes.
When people say a galactic calendar, then you have to look at what are these people talking about and where are they getting it from. So you hear people talking about a galactic calendar and talking about Native Americans and, galactic history and all of this other nonsense. Always go back and see exactly where are they getting these things from. The calendar you find in ancient America is just a modification of calendar from ancient Kanit and Kemet. And when these individuals talk about Mayans and everything else, and they're talking about galactical phases and things like that, they begin to add things and manufacture different things, and the whites and offspring come along and try to create a history for these people that does not exist. We understood the great year, the Afuraitkaitnut, the great year in ancient Kemet and so forth. We understood the movement of Sa or Orion. This is why we talked about the Tepi, or the first time and so forth, and going back thousands of years, and we had monuments that are directly connected, vision of so-called Sa, Al-Sar Sa, or Orion in the sky going back over 13,000 years ago. And that was the beginning of that new 26,000-year cycle. This is why we have our years beginning with 13,000, because it goes back to the Tepi, or the beginning of that 26,000 year cycle that we're in right now. So we understood that. So the Tepi, when you look at it and go back and you do the calculations and so forth, at first they were trying to say it was like 12,500 years ago, but then they started realizing it was recalculated. Now they're saying it's like 12,868 years ago, something like that. RS Mafo showed us 13,000 years ago. This is why we're talking about 13,016. But the key is we're in the midst of that 26,000 year astronomical cycle that can be measured. Our people always understood that. We built monuments connected with that, not only in Kemet in the north, but also in the south and the southwestern desert and so forth. So when you study Napta Playa, we have monuments going back over 19,000 years there. So when they're talking about giving themselves a kind of history that they don't have, and they start talking about this is a galactic cycle, they really don't know what they're talking about. They got these calendars from our people. They're repeating certain things, but then they're trying to stick themselves in a previous cycle. They want to try to stick themselves prior to this recent 26,000-year cycle to try to give themselves an antiquity that they do not have. They didn't even exist in that prior cycle. They didn't exist. The whites and offspring didn't exist in the previous 20,000-year cycle. They didn't even, white-skinned people weren't walking around at that time. So that's just political, but it's not reality.
Okay, that's I heard a Moors mentioned that to me, and I didn't know. So I looked it up, and it did look like they were leaving out the ancient times. Everybody's there but us. You know what I mean? I was wondering. I said,
anytime you have somebody who identifies as a Moor trying to give information about anything, you know it's straight misinformation. There's always going to be some foolishness, and it's going to be very ridiculous. They're going to try to take one document from somewhere, and then they're going to weave in a great deal of stupidity and try to make it into a history that does not exist, because that's what they do.
Okay, now my last question, I don't know if it's off the subject, but I was reading something from when Imhotep, when he was talking to King Ammon, and he was saying not to let the Greeks in because their words are harsh, and something about Tahuti. Now, what I'm getting at is like in the Bible they have, my lot shall be established. Is there a reading in our Papyrus of Ani or the Book of the Dead that talks about Imhotep speaking to the king of Ammon, and then he goes into asking what's going to happen to our people. He tells him, the Tahuti comes in and tells him, we're going to go through this sleep and go through this, what we're going through. And then Imhotep is crying and saying, well, will our people ever get in? And then Tahuti tells him, my lot shall be established. Is that true or not? Is there a reading that we have?
So what that is these what they call these emerald tablets and all of that.
Oh.
And those are very recent creations. So whether people talking about the emerald tablets or talking about the history of Thoth and the thrice great Atlantean, the divine Pymander, the Kabbalion, all these different things. All of that is recent misinformation. All it has to do with white so-called occultists, Gnostics, and all this other nonsense, trying to recreate fragments of our tradition and try to fix themselves in the tradition and give themselves a history that does not exist. If you want to, so that the emerald tablets are fake. It's not reality at all. So when reading that information, totally inaccurate. The actual text that we have, they still exist. They're carved on the walls, they're in the papyri and everything else. So when you listen to the Kukutuntun, for example, and we're talking about, as well as other publications, we talk about Asar, Aset, Heru, Set, Nebuchadnezzar, that entire story. We have a publication called Kam Ur and Kamet Uri, Asar, Aset, and the restoration of the Afuraitkaitnut in the Amenti in the West, so that death of Asar and being, carved up and scattered and so forth, and Aset forced out of her rulership, and then she finds the body of Asar in the north in the papyrus swamps, and then she reunites with him and so forth and gives birth to Heru, the revolutionary, and he connects with Heru Bahudet, and they fight against Set, followers and so forth. That entire story, we show the connection, and many people have shown that, but we show some more details that the deities interfacing with one another in creation that affects us collectively as a Afuraitkaitnut population. So the unfolding of our true story can be shown in the cosmology, including how we end up. So that's already shown in the story of Asar, Aset, and Heru. The whole thing with, Thoth and Asclepius or Tahuti and Imhotep and all of that, emerald tablets, that's total misinformation.
Oh, all right. That's it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any out there? So we have one more call on the phone line. Michelle on the phone line.
Yes, Kwesi. Greetings. My question in regards to organs. It is said, I remember, let's say something happens to the heart briefly, and the heart shuts down. And electromagnetic, the impulse they use to charge up to bring back the heart and the nervous system back functioning. What does even the brain have to play in a more vital role? Because the heart is important, but never was much been explained in proper detail about the brain. Because doesn't brain deal with electrons and neurons the same way? I'm not sure if you understand what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. So, but in order, you have to have that. The key is the heart and lung complex. The reason they place it there, because when sometimes people, the heart and lungs and everything are working fine, but then the person is brain dead. There's no activity, and at that point they're like, well, listen, even though the person is on a machine and the heart is pumping and the lungs are expanding and contracting and so forth, and there's oxygen going, circulating through the body, the person is brain dead, so there's no activity. They're really dead. So you're just kind of like, blowing air in and out of a dead body. And once you take them off the machine, it's going to be over. So, but the reason why if the person is not brain dead, the reason why they go directly for the heart and lung complex with the two electric pads to jumpstart that, because, of course, if the breathing shuts down or the heart doesn't pump for a certain period, not very long, number of seconds, or, you can hold your breath for, a minute or two or something like that, but go longer than that, it can lead to brain damage, but then it leads to death. So you have to get the heart and lung complex and the breathing activity going so that oxygen can continue to come into the body, so oxygen can continue to get to the brain, so the person doesn't, number one, suffer brain damage, but then, ultimately brain death as well. You got to get the heart and lung complex going.
Okay. That's my only question. Medase.
Okay.
One thing, yes, is this going to be a PDF on tonight's broadcast, or is this a series that's going to lead to a booklet down the line?
We will publish the information about Hapi and the nature of hibernation and so forth. We are going to publish that soon, so it will be out.
Okay, Medase. Thank you.
Okay, Okay, and we have about 10 minutes left in the broadcast. So if you have if you want to listen beyond 11:30, we probably won't have to go beyond 11:30, but just in case, it will cut off at 11:30. So you must get on the phone line prior to 11:30 in order to hear beyond that. So the call-in number is 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635, and you have about a little bit less than 9 minutes to call in. And we have one more call, but if you're not able to stay on, I'll say for tuning in. And again, if you would like to place an ad in the journal, you can do so ASAP. We did a little extension because we have a little bit more room for a few more ads, about 10 more ads. So for the formatting of the book, the journal, so go to the ODWIRA Afashe page. You can make the payment there, and you can send us the JPEG via email. And also with the special, with regard to the 5 books for $40, you can go there to the publications page, hit the button for that, and just make sure you add in the comment section which 5 books you would like to receive. And again, this is a way to assist us in putting on these free conferences and bringing out the speakers and compensating for the various expenses. So again, Yeda said we appreciate you tuning in. We're going to go to the phone line. Chiavo on the phone line, number 0420.
Hi, Chamo. Just a question. When you made mention of someone being brain dead, but there are machines that are keeping air going into their lungs and monitoring their heart rate. In the event of someone being in a coma, where exactly is their consciousness, I guess, focused at? If it's not focused on just being present here, physically, like what happens to, I guess, that person's mind and okra and,
Okay, so it's very similar to the sleep state. And of course, we're talking about someone whose spirit is in their body, because sometimes people have already made transition, and they're literally their body is just hooked up to a machine and it's just inflating their lungs back and forth, but the spirit is already left. Then people are trying to decide whether or not they should pull the plug and all of that. But sometimes the spirit is still in the body. They just have a body that's weak and inoperable. You know what I'm saying? And they need assistance on a machine to keep going. But it's very similar to the sleep state. If the body is not functioning properly, or if it's quote unquote sedated, drugged, or whatever it is, then the spirit is still operating. The spirit can be focused on the people who are in the room at the time, or the spirit can be interfacing with other ancestral spirits and non-relatives in the spirit realm and communicating with them. No different than the sleep state. Your spirit is connected to your physical body, but it can leave the physical body and interface with other ancestresses and ancestors, as well as non-relatives, deceased non-relatives, as well as the Abosom and so forth, or can be earthbound and communicate with those who are in the room and so forth. So it just depends on what's going on with the person. They're either focused on who's there presently and they remain quote-unquote earthbound, or they're interfacing with other ancestral spirits or non-relatives.
Right. So in a situation, I guess, like that, essentially would the individual spirit, I guess, make the decision to, I guess, whether to try to return to the body or just leave in terms of dying physically? Or does that depend on the situation?
It depends on the situation. It depends on the individual. It depends on what they have been doing and everything that led up to how they got to that specific position. Were they forced into that position? Were they attacked or, injured or something like that? Did they do something that led to such an impacting injury? Are they being pulled by the Ntorou to separate and just leave the body in a quote-unquote suicidal kind of thing? This kind of relatives who may not be spiritually cultivated. Or is it their time to separate? If their time to separate, then they will separate. Sometimes people try to take themselves out. It's no different than physically committing suicide, or somebody shooting themselves in the head or whatever. People can spiritually separate as well and cause death as well, and that's suicidal as well. So they don't want to return, and they force themselves, and they force that break, and then they break, and that's suicide. So it depends on the mindset of the person. Are they executing their function? Did they put themselves in a situation where they ended up in that position? Is it time for them to go? It just, what happened in the previous lifetime led up to this kind of situation itself. So it's a number of different factors that play into what's going on with the person. It's a case-by-case thing.
Right. Oh, yeah, and I take it in the cases of people that may attempt to kill themselves, that whether they survive or not, that would also be a case-by-case situation, because you have some people that, they attempt to kill themselves, but whatever issues that led them to attempt that, they really wanted a certain amount of attention so they could get help, so the attempt would be unsuccessful, or however they tried to kill themselves, they did it in a way where there is a good chance of their surviving the attempt. And then there are others that whatever they're trying to do to kill themselves, they're not leaving any window of opportunity to be rescued or to survive. So
yeah, and then and that's what you said. That's on the physical side, but then it can also be on a mirror of that on the spiritual side. So meaning like you mentioned, some people will do something, but there's still a window where they can come out of it. So they're not going, they're upset and they're depressed and everything else, and they kind of want to do it, but they didn't throw themselves off of a mountain. You know what I'm saying? They may have taken some pills, and there's still a chance that people can rescue them in time and get them back. They know what they're doing, but then they're also saying, well, if nobody gets me, then I guess this is going to be it. Then you have other people who are definitely trying to take themselves out, and there's no, they're not playing any game. But then on the spiritual side, it's similar as well, because when people go through that and they do something like that, their okra is not leading them to commit suicide. So if they were somebody who ultimately really wanted to align with their okra, but they're disaligned right now and they do something crazy like that, and then they're in a coma or something like that, and their spirit really did want to align with the cross, and they really don't want to leave, but then they're just upset about the situation. Spiritually, there's a tug of war between, should I align with my crowd, which I really want to do, and I really don't want to leave, but then I'm really upset about the situation. So that's going on when they're in a coma. But their cry has not led them to death. So it's not a real suicide attempt. It's more like you said, a cry for help.
Okay, and I guess my last question is within
Let me just say right quick, there's about 45 seconds left in the online broadcast. If you want to hear beyond 11:30, you have to call in the next half a minute, 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635. Okay.
Okay. Just want to get an idea of the time frame of, I guess, those of our people that would eventually become the whites and their offspring. How far back can I get in the, 13,000 year or 20,000 year cycle did that take place? As far as, them leaving Africa and ending up in Central Asia, loss of the pigmentation and other physical mutations.
Right. So that was around, so by the time the last glacial period began to, ended, about 12,000 years ago when the ice begins to recede, and then they have more free-flowing movement. They can actually move around easier and leave northern Eurasia and get towards southern Europe and so forth. They began to get, be able to move like that about 12,000 years ago. But they were caught up in that last ice age. So it doesn't take thousands of years. They were just isolated. And, inbreeding, incest inbreeding, all of that kind of thing, as well as vitiligo and things like that happening during that period. And diet. They even done recent studies talking about the same thing, and genetic studies that have simply confirmed what people have been talking about for a number of years, showing that the switch in diet leading to that depigmentation and everything else. Living in that glacial period, not having the kind of nutrients they would normally have, but they didn't focus too much on the inbreeding and the incest and so forth because they don't want to put their people out like that. So that's really what's going on, inclusive of the diet as well. So it doesn't take thousands of years. That can happen in a couple of generations. So it doesn't take a long time, for that to take place. What took thousands of years was the fact that that glacial period lasts for thousands of years, and you have a physical barrier separating this little population where they couldn't, interface with the rest of our people. So it was just that. It wasn't like it took them thousands of years to turn white. That happens within a couple of generations.
Okay, so you're saying that so the physical mutations that could have taken place within 3 or 4 generations? Or 5?
For example, two brown-skinned people can give birth to a white-skinned baby with blonde hair that's an albino. And when they have albino children, and if they're isolated in a glacial, covered area, and they engage in incest, that greatly increases the incidence of albinism. So now they're producing populations of albinos. They have a negative diet, not nutrient-rich and so forth, so therefore these autoimmune deficiencies like vitiligo happen to take place and they become depigmented. Somebody can, develop a very bad case of vitiligo and become depigmented in their lifetime. And still right now, they don't know what causes, they know it's an autoimmune deficiency, but they don't know what causes it, don't know how to stop vitiligo. So that can happen within someone's lifetime, and then they can pass that on to their, children. And that's within one generation. Then you have people isolated, living like that for thousands of years. They're the only people to copulate with, so they're just producing physically degenerate people in every generation.
Right. So the initial mutations that would be within a few generations, and then that the change in the environment as well as the food available there, and I guess various nutritional deficiencies, and I guess this case of stabilized albinism as far as the reinforcement of, I guess, recessive genetic traits. So by the time they come out of that glacier, I guess everyone else on the planet is looking at them like, okay, where did these people come from?
Even if it had only, even if that glacial period had only lasted for 150 years, they still would have come out the same way. It just so happened that it was thousands of years, but it didn't take thousands of years for them to transform like that.
Right.
But it always goes back to a spiritual degeneration first, which causes them to be forced away from the larger population in the first place because they're engaged in disorder. And then that's going to manifest in the kind of behavior as well as their morphology and phenotypes and so forth that's disfigured as well because the crop leaves, so they're spiritually disfigured. It's going to manifest in a physical disfigurement also. That's the real key. That spiritual disfigurement leads to a physical disfigurement, and that'll manifest through vitiligo, manifest through the desire to engage in incest, with siblings as well as adults and children and everything else. That's a manifestation of their disorder. Okay, so Yeda said we appreciate that call, and we are, okay, so it's 11:35, so that was the last call. We're going to end it here. We'll be back on tomorrow for Egua Marketplace. Again, if you have any questions or comments, you can hit us up on Facebook. You can follow us on Facebook, friend us on Facebook, Kwesi Akan, ODWIRA Akan on Facebook, ODWIRA on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, as well as on the Blog Talk Radio channel. Click the follow button on our channel page, and that way anytime we have a announcement, a broadcast coming out, or release of a broadcast, release of any announcement, you'll automatically receive the indication. We're also on Google Plus. That's connected. ODWIRA on Google Plus, of course, that's connected with YouTube and everything. So again, we appreciate you tuning into the broadcast. Go to the ODWIRA Mind Afashe page on our website, but we also have an ODWIRA Mind Afashe page for the conference on Facebook as well. We have a separate ODWIRA Mind Afashe Afurakanu, the Purified Nation of Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut in the Western Hemisphere Conference Festival. We have a special page for that on Facebook. We look forward to everyone coming out to the event on June 24th here in Washington, D.C. That's the week after most of the children are out of school. Some people are going to take a half a day. It's going to start at 12. Doors will open at 12 p.m. The vendors will be there the whole day, of course. We'll start the process program at 1 o'clock. So some people are taking a day off. Some people are taking a half day. Even if you took a half day, you'll be able to get there in time for the beginning of the conference. So, Yedase, we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast, and Yebesha Abio, we will meet again. Okay.